A long, low hole slides out of mist and into a river mouth. Oars bite. A steersman reads the ripples, and the lookout names sandbars by memory. The story you think you know begins with fire on monasteries. Ours begins with timetables, tides, fairs, winter harbors, courts that speak the law from a rock. Tonight we follow the Vikings not as a storm, but as a network would, wind, and reputation stitched from Newfoundland to Baghdad. Our through question is simple. How did a people with no horned helmets and few written rules turn boats, silver, and vows into reach that outlived their raids? Well, track 3 working machines. First, the ship, clinker planks, shallow draft, beach landings, river as road, portage as toll. Second, the silver economy, dirhams cut to weight, scales that decide trust, markets from rib and burqa to the Volga. Third, the thing the assembly ware owes, fosterage, and outlawry convert violence into predictable fees. 3 recurring voices will ground us. A fjord shipwright who measures strength in grain and rivets a market woman at Korpang who counts hex silver by candlelight, and the lost speaker whose memory keeps peace louder than any sword. Raids will appear, but freight pays the bills. Missionaries will come, but contracts change slower than creeds. If history told with boats, scales, and sentences works for you, climb in. The tide is turning, and the river is on schedule. The first part. A hole grows like a rib cage under a tarp of cloud. In a fjord yard, the shipwright planes a strake until it sings, lays it against the one below, and fixes the overlap with iron rivets and small square rows. Clinker-built lap strake means the boat flexes with chop instead of fighting it. He taps a seam with tar and wool, slides a hand along the curve, and marks, with a thumb of soot, where the mast step will bite. No romance here, only grain, bend, and balance. He sets the keel on rollers and calls for 6-backs. The hull moves with the cadence of a chant, down to the tide line, where stones remember other launches. The square sail waits folded. Heavy with lanolin, the yard is longer than a house, the mast short and thick. This isn't a ship made to bully deep seas. It is a boat made to negotiate edges, beach to river, river to marsh, marsh to track, shallow draft, broad shoulders, oars you can ship and unship in a heartbeat. Terms, quick and clean, so the ear stays sure. Strake, a plank in the whole skin, each one lapped over the last. Kelson, the spine inside that hugs the keel and holds the mast step. Leeboard, not used here, Vikings sail without them trim and or do the lateral work. Draft, how deep the loaded hull sits, half a man's leg for a light warboat, more for cargo. Portage, land carry, when the river says no, shoulders say yes. Everything about this boat is a bet that water is usually near. Numbers that hold without swagger. 5 to 7 knots under a decent wind. More in a sprint with surf behind. 20 to 30 men at the oars. If rain kills, wind cargo boats in a rear carry 20. 30 tons when honest. A foot of water under the keel, enough on a good day. Sandbars forgive light holes that can be dragged sideways with poles and curses. A day's work, with river and luck, is 30-40 miles with a clean sea, and the following wind, triple that. Close scene, river mouth. The steersman holding a steering oar hung on the starboard quarter reads ruffles and colour shifts where salt meets fresh. Bar to port, he says in a voice that doesn't rise. Two young men lean their oars to cheat the hull a hand's breadth. The shipwright on the foredeck watches the bows whisper, not the sky. He has marked the load line. With a gouge the boat rides as she should. In the stern, a boy fingers a small scale and waits in a leather pouch, practicing the balance that decides silver later. Myth, trimmed and tagged. Horned helmets belong to opera. Most crews wear nothing on their heads, but hair and maybe felt shields hang on the gunwales to dry into pasture. These boats raid because they can arrive where walls don't reach. They trade because the same shallow reach lets them nose into markets before daylight. The technology is not exotic, it is consistent. Up the river a track crosses a spit of land where the current turns mean. Portage, men unload barrels of tar and fish, sacks of cloth, a bale of furs, A small chest with cut Arab dirhams scored for breaking. Rollers go under poles, bite mud. One man calls cadence lift, push, rest. The hull shivers like an animal, and then rides water again. 20 bow lengths later, past a fall that would have swallowed her. The shipwright taps the mast step with a knuckle and nods as if to a friend. Names matter because names are maps. Westvega, the west way, runs to the islands and the Frankish rivers. Ostvega, the east way, threads the Skerries to Berka and the Mla. Then down the Dnieper, all the Volga toward towns with names that sound like coins. Novgorod, Bulgar, Itil. Thing is the word for assembly. It also means the habit of solving anger with words and fines before steel. Boats connect markets, markets need courts. Seen at sea, short and spare. A squall darkens the edge of the world. The square sail slats, and the steersman calls for reefing. To men run the brails, dragging the belly up into a smaller, safer triangle. The hull is a violin against the wave, flexing but not breaking. They lie a hole for a minute, drift in a controlled sulk, then set a handkerchief of cloth and creep toward the lee of a headland. A boat like this survives by changing its mind quickly. Numbers again, useful in the ear. A single oak of the right age yields 2. 3 good strakes a hull's life might be 20, 30 seasons if maintained, fewer if overloaded and unlucky. Iron rivets are costly, a good yard hoards them like bread. Tar is time harvested from pine by men who cook the forest into glue. Sails take thousands of hours of wool, spin, weave, and fulling a bad sail kills quiet crews. Bring the market into view so the river has a reason. At Korpang, the market woman lays out hack silver on a cloth. Scale-poised beads from the east sit in a dish like rain cones, and small knives make a neat row. She knows a hole by its smell, and will know today's even before she sees the paint, tar, fish, salt, wet oak, wool grease, men. She sets weights where a fair deal lands and where a lie tips. A small correction to the schoolroom picture. Longship is a family name, not a single shape. There are fast, lean boats for men and shields. There are belly holes for cargo. There are small, nimble coasters that never see open ocean and never need to. All can be dragged, all can be beached, none are meant to stand on their dignity waiting for a pier that might not exist. Tie wood to law so stakes land. A boat this easy to hide makes law more urgent, not less. Without courts, things, and predictable fines, every landing would become a feud. The shipwright knows this in his bones. He has seen holes burned, not by storms, but by vengeance. He has also seen a lost speaker raise a hand on a rock and turn 3 fights into a price list. That is the other technology, memory with witnesses, that makes distance safe to cross. One last image before we slide into the market where silver will learn to speak. The hull kisses a muddy shore, men jump, catch, and hold up pole plants and keeps her from slewing. The shipwright steps onto pebbles, kneels without ceremony, and checks the forefoot for scrapes. The steersman coils a sheet, a boy stows the scale. Up the track the hum of voices has the shape of a price, all stack like ribs in a rack. The river has become a street. The second part. Markets teach boats to speak. By mid-morning the river has turned into stalls and voices. And under a canvas awning at Korpang, the market woman lays out a world on a cloth. Beads from the east that glow like rain, combs cut from antler, small knives, a weighted bar of silver scored for breaking, and a tin of tiny bronze weights. Her equal-armed scale fits in a palm. The beam's tongue rises and falls with the patience of a judge. Men arrive smelling of tar and wool grease. She greets the steersman by calling out the color his sail used to be before salt took it. Silver is the language shared across coasts that do not share a king. Arab dirhams, coins from far-off mints with flowing script, arrive as money, and that live here as metal. Many show bite marks where someone tested them, many are clipped to make change. Hack silver rings, armlets, bars lies in coils and sticks, scissored to weight. The market woman divides a ring with a twist and a snap, puts the piece on the pan, and adds a seed weight until the beam stands level. Good, she says, and pushes the payment across. Value is balance before it is faith. Terms, quick and clean. Dirham, a silver coin from the Islamic mints Abbasid. Some on it, about 3 grams when honest. Heck silver. Cut pieces of silver used by weight, not by face. Mark. A large weight unit roughly 200 grams in many northern uses useful for bulk deals. L. A measure of cloth length. Elbow to fingertip you pay by ells, as well as by weight. Thing. The public assembly, where disputes are settled, and weights tested. The law speaker recites law from memory, so trade doesn't drown in quarrel. Numbers that hold without swagger. A common small weight on her tray is near 3 grams a dirham's promise. A good week's takings might total half a mark, enough to buy a winter of grain if the river cooperates. Hods buried in the north later will hold hundreds, even thousands, of dirhams, proof that rivers move more wealth than fires do. A fur pack fits a man's back a cargo, nor carries tons between them at the road of everyday profit. Close scene. A deal that smells like spruce and rain. The shipwright brings forward a bundle, boards of straight grain, tar barrels sealed with plugs, and a short chest with 6 dirhams and a kinked ring. The market woman weighs the ring, clips it once clean, weighs again, nods, and counts beads into a dish blue and green, some with a cloudy heart that catches light. A trader from the east, his beard threaded with copper wire, sets down a small weight stamped with a pattern. She knows trusted weights make shorter conversations. Myth, trimmed and tagged. Vikings paid in coins is not wrong, but it hides the truth. They paid in silver's weight. A dirham's face matters less than its massa coin from Baghdad, and a broken arm ring can buy the same comb, as the scale agrees. And markets are not lawless, they are law turned into public courtesy. The loudest men here are the ones who shout prices, not threats. Further inland, across the water's shoulder, the other markets hum their own dialects. Rib and Yadibi face the North Sea winds. Burka sits among lake paths, like a spider in a quiet web. Dorostad listens to the Rhine Staraya, Ladoga, and Novgorod trade fair, and wax down the Volga to Bulgar and Itil, where dirhams first taste the north. Names are not trivia, they are lines on a ledger, and boats are pens. The law speaker stands on a rock in a circle of shields at the thing and turns silver into sentences. Weights to be tested at the start of market. Clipped coins allowed. If the balance says so, feuds settled by Wergeld. So much for a wound, so much for a death, paid in metal and in shame. He touches the scales beam, turns his palm, and the crowd watches the tongue settle. O's breed, the beam agrees. A man who refuses the balance becomes an outlaw. Outside protection, outside price. Violence does not disappear, it becomes expensive. Bring our 3 lives tight to the table, so the network feels human. The market woman keeps a small slate of favors owed and favors returned. She lends a seed weight to a young trader who forgot his set and takes a bead string as pledge. The shipwright barters to barrels of tar for a length of fine cloth measured by ells. He plans a new sail and hums the rope count under his breath. A boy from the crew, same one who practiced with the scale, just learned that the weight of a promise is something you can feel when the beam stops moving. Numbers again, useful. At Korpanga Fair might run 6, 8 weeks in summer. The river's depth sets the calendar more than any priest. North route traders plan for a freeze that will turn water into road. West route cruise time tides at river mouths where sand moves like thought. Silver hoards in Sweden and on Gotland tell a story you can weigh. More dirhams when eastern routes run safe. Fewer when steppe wars or taxmen throttle flow. Markets remember in metal when writing is sparse. A necessary shadow, kept brief and honest. Alongside furs, wax, and iron, people are traded to captives taken in raids. Debtors sold by kin. The market woman's eyes flick to a pen of the newly unlucky and back to her scale. The law speaker's voice is hardest when lives sit near prices. Ransoms cost more than goods. Frauds here stain a name beyond repair. We will not dwell, we will not pretend it did not exist. The beam holds both. Ties scale to sea road, so stakes land. A boat that can beach where it pleases can also disappear with a bad debt. The thing posts penalties that reach into the next market along the river, so escape isn't easy. Fosterage sending a child to be raised by allies, not families across fjords. making trust larger than blood. A broken weight at rib can mean angry men at EDB next spring. The lost speaker's memory is a bridge, real as a portage track. One last image before we follow Silver up the east way toward rivers that carry coins like bright fish. The market thins as rain comes on. The woman ties her scale into a cloth and weighs it in her hand. By habit, the shipwright checks the lashings on tar and cloth. The boy counts his weights twice and tucks them into his pouch. Down on the mud, a hole swings a little with the tide and rests as if listening. In the shadow of a stall, a dirham gleams in a cut face. Script unreadable, but mass undeniable. Tomorrow the beam will level again, and law will feel like balance. The third part. The East Way is a contract written in water. Past Burka's quiet lakes the river narrows, the banks lean in, and the whole begins to read in another language. Sedge, eddy, tea-brown flow that hides a log just under breath. At Staraya Ladogar, the market smells of tar and beeswax, and dirhams come upstream in sacks that sound like rain. Men from the north call themselves traders when the wind is fair, and Varangians when the oars bite. The difference is price, not poetry. Seen portage on a black earth ridge. The river forks into teeth and the water hisses where it falls. Volokland carry turns current into mud and men. They unload, waxing cakes scored with knife marks, beaver and sable furs bundled tight against damp, bars of blue iron in burlap, a coffer of cut dirhams, rollers under, poles at shoulders. One man takes the forefoot, one the stern post, to more heave at the midships as the hull slides over swamp grass and a scatter of old bones of boats that didn't learn the path. Lift push rest, calls the steersman. A boy who will be a scaleman someday counts the beats like prayer. Terms, clean enough to trust. Ostrovegra, the East Way, the routes that run from Baltic skerries through the lakes to the Dnieper or Volga. Volok, portage, often measured in bowshots, how far two men can drag before breath insists on a pause. Druzhina, a sworn crew serving a leader, equal parts bodyguard and partnership. Varangians, northerners on eastern service in Byzantium, they will become a guard with axes and pay scales stamped in gold. Bulgar and Itil, Volga towns where steppe and river meet. Silver arrives here first, in Arabic script that no one needs to read to weigh. Numbers that hold without swagger. A portage might be a few hundred paces, or a mile that feels like 3-9 rapids on the Dnieper, are famous for good reason. A winter camp needs cords of wood, a ditch, a palisade, and a habit 2 hours of watch, 2 of sleep. Repeat. Dirham weight, about 3 grams. When honest a good season's run can send home a horde of hundreds. Downstream to Bulgar in a week if the river keeps its promises. Back upstream longer, with curses and poles. Close scene, Bulgar market, a shelf of dry land above wide, brown water. A Sogdian speaker in a dyed cap counts dirhams with a practiced finger and holds a fine scale to the wind, so the beam settles true. Our market woman from Korpang could work this table without a word in common. Beam, pans, seed weight same grammar. The north lays furs and wax, the steppe lays silver and silk, both lay eyes on knives. The lost speaker's voice is far behind on a rock at home, but his rules weights tested in public. Oaths backed by hostages, fines posted at the thing ripples this far by reputation. A man who cheats at Bulgar will find his name bought dear at Burka next summer. Myth, trimmed and tagged. The Rus conquered the rivers, makes a tasty line. They rented them with labour. Tributary peoples paid in fur and honey. Northerners took a cut and carried goods further down. Taxes and tolls flowed both ways. There were raids, camps burned, boats cut from moorings, men sold, brutal sums paid, but the constant noise under the violence was trade. The hordes in Sweden and on Gotland, thousands of dirhams in some finds speak louder than any saga. Silver by weight, seasons by schedule. Winter closes the ledger and opens a score. On a frozen bend, crews raise huts inside a low palisade, logs flat, sod thick on the roof. They trade with people who talk in different verbs and teach them words for rope, knife, and thanks. A woman with a felt cap and quiet eyes swaps dried fish for iron nails. She laughs at a boy's accent and shows him how to set a snare. The shipwright mends a sprung plank with a new rivet and whispers to the hull, if it were a stubborn friend. The Drusiner's leader writes debt in memory, who carried the bow first at the Volok, who ate last, who owes a hide in spring. Numbers again, useful in the year. A wintering camp eats through a cow a fortnight, and a barrel of grain quicker than anyone hopes. Wax keeps candles honest salt, keeps patience from rotting. 3 fingers of frost can take a man's toe, if he honors pride more than wool. A palisade a man high will not stop cavalry, it will keep arguments with neighbors polite. Bring our 3 lives to the same table. Far from home, the market woman stands in a smoky shelter, teaching a local girl how to flick a scale's tongue to make it stop trembling faster. She buys a string of beads that traveled from far past the Caspian for a cleaned pelt and a story. The law speaker is not here, but his echo is. A hostage son sleeping under a bench with a wooden toy axe. Proof that to camps have promised not to make a winter stupid. The shipwright walks the rim of the frozen hull and thinks about spring, the line of the keel in current, the new sail he measured by ells back at Korpang, the dirhams he will cut with his teeth to test. Terms, 2 more, then back to water. Wergeld, the price of a life higher for a free man. Lower for a thrall ugly math that keeps steel quiet when tempers snap. Outlawry, to be outside protection here. It means more than shame, it means no guest right. No price. No market woman willing to weigh your silver. In a world of boats, exile is a sentence worse than bad weather. Spring breaks the river like glass under a warm hand, and the run home turns market wisdom into wake. Upstream loads change shape. More silk in tight rolls, more silver in pouches hidden, where a thief would hesitate to reach. Maybe one more child in a crew than the crew started with, sworn by Frostridge into another household to make an oath stick. At a Nipa rapid the men float the whole light, walk it on lines like a stubborn animal, and cheer as a wave chooses not to bite. On the lakes, wind finds the square sail, and forgets to quit the mast groans like a man who stands after sitting too long. Numbers, under weather note. In the 970s, the dirham flow will fall to troubles in Samonid lands. Mints falling quiet and northern hordes will change flavor by the century's turn. Fewer Arabic coins, more Western pennies. Markets bend when rivers of money change course. West Vega will sharpen Frisia, the English towns, the rivers of the Franks, because silver is a habit and habits hate to go hungry. A short scene of danger, kept honest, as a narrow reach to men step from brush, not local, their speech knives in the mouth. The Druzhina leader stands on the foredeck with his hands spread, showing empty palms and a heavy purse, and shouts the things rate for passage in the nearest dialect he knows. The bandits laugh, then someone on the bank recognizes a shield pattern from last year's fair, and the laugh drains. Reputation, like a scales balance, settles slow, and then all at once. Tie river law back to rock law, so stakes land. When the crew returns to their home thing, they bring more than goods. They bring stories that become policy. A fair toll here, a foul ambush there, a market where weights were honest, a camp where guest right was cut. The law speaker listens, nods, and adds a verse to the law no one writes, but all can recite. On the east way, those who cheat the beam shall pay twice at home. A line like that travels farther than swords can be carried. One last image before we swing west into the lands that will learn to pay Danegeld and buy peace by the chest. At dawn on a clear lake, the whole slides past islands that look like sleeping seals. The market woman counts seed weights with her eyes closed. The shipwright checks a scene with his thumbnail and smiles. A boy practices saying Itil and Bolgar as if the words were charms. In a pouch, a dirham shows a bend where teeth bit it once. The beam will hold again at the next table. Rivers are roads, roads are promises, promises are prices spoken aloud. The fourth part. The West Way pays in pennies and promises. Out past the Skagerrak, the tide makes its own calendar, and the hole that learned lakes now learns to read bars and bores. The seven snarl, the Humber's long breath, the Saint's patient bends. Raids made the name, markets made the rent. Where a river meets a road and a sheltered bank, a long fort grows first a ditch and a palisade, then a street, then a habit. Dublin begins that way. Ships pulled into an oval of stakes, winter stores under tar, a row of sheds, four combs, glass and cloth. By spring, silver knows the way. Terms, quick and clean, long fort, shipping closure, a fortified harbour camp that becomes a town if seasons repeat. Danegeld, money paid to make violence behave ransom, protection, tribute, call it what you like. Its policy priced in silver, penny, the West's coin small, bright, a gram and change struck with a king's name, worth face, and weight both, tested by ear and scale. Husting, a market assembly in towns like London and Jorvik, a thing by another name. Wapentake, a district that answers with weapons raised day when law is read, a thing made administrative. Numbers that hold without swagger. A springtide lifts a hull, a man's height on the seven bore, you ride it like a thief and arrive like a schedule. A long fort's ditchman deep, to men wide, can be thrown up in a week by hungry hands. Danegeld's paid in England and Frisia run to chests, not purses, thousands upon thousands of coins tipped into scales, while clerks scratch until their fingers cramp. A penny's ring on a table tells you more in a second than a title does in an hour. Seine River, Paris, 845 by later counting. Foreglow, older smell, was hardly touching. Square sails come down at a bend, and hulls slide past orchards toward bridges that look like teeth. Monks ring bells, count troops, the river counts in boats. Charles pays silver to send the ships away. A sack is a sermon, the payment is a policy. What matters for our hour? The habit hardens. Ports learn to price peace, crews learn that threat can be invoiced, both learn that next year has its own invoice if rules are not posted. Myth, trimmed and tagged. Danegeld ruined England is a sentence that forgets why it was paid. To buy time when roads and fleets were not ready. To keep fields safe in harvest weeks that cannot be repeated. Not noble, not foolish, sometimes the least bad line item in a budget. Horns still do not sprout on helmets. Blood eagle tails belong to fear, and later pens law and money do most of the work. Jorvik, York, when the tongue soften teaches what happens when a winter camp stays for a generation. Streets take Norse names, Coppergate smells of horn, and dye traders lay out beads and glass that remember the East, even as pennies from Westminster clink like rain. The husting meets the lotspeaker, now an Englishman with a Norse word in his mouth recites finds that mixed illegal grammars, wergeld and wergild, oath helpers and jurors. A weight is set beside the town's standard to test travelling scales. Somewhere a clerk stamps street, Peter on a coin, and learns to think in production runs. Silver shifts flavour and the network bends, not breaks, as Eastern dirhams thin in the late 10th century. Carolingian and Anglo-Saxon pennies bulk on the cloth. The market woman older, quicker still weighs when a coin looks thin, still clips when no one's looking, but more often she listens for ring and looks at the die. A face on a coin is a promise the king must honour with weights, roads and justice. A scale still waits on the cloth to call his bluff. Bring the shipwright into the Irish Sea, where hulls rub against kingdoms. He shortens a master hand's breadth for better balance under gusts, adds a rib where a plank worked loose at the Longfort's bank, and drills a new hole for a stay, so the square sail can stand like a door against the night wind. He builds a fatter gnaw for a Dublin man with a gift for counting, that hull will carry hides and slaves and wine and regret between islands that learn each other's calendars the hard way. We will not look away, but we will not dwell. The Longfort template makes a market for people as well as things. Captives from raids, debtors sold by kin, strangers without kin at all. The husting sets ransoms high to slow the trade. Priests and skalds argue, silver answers most loudly. Later centuries will call Dublin a city. It begins as a ledger written with boats and bars. Our hour keeps the weight of that in the beam. Numbers again, useful in the ear. A hull that can be dragged needs a dozen men for a mile of portage. A cargo that pays needs a second hull behind it. A spring fair runs to 40, 60 days, tides set opening hours without a bell. Danegeld in a bad year can pay a fleet's crews a season's wages and buy a king a winter to drill men at fords. Jorvik's comb makers work antler into neat teeth at a pace you can hear in your jaw. Scrape, scrape, test, scrape. Tie pennies to policy so stakes land. When a king's mint stamps pure and keep scales honest, markets thicken and raiders turn into toll takers with better clothes. When a mint cheats or a road goes wild, boats revert to threat and Danegeld becomes tuition in cowardice. The hustings posted rate stole here. Fairy there. Fines for weights that lie decide whether a river becomes a street or a wound. Seeing Dublin's Longfort at dusk. Boats beached, stocks of tar under canvas, a line of stakes out in the shallows. To break a thief's nerve, a clerk with a thin voice reads a toll list by firelight. A priest walks the bank with a small cross and a big ladle of soup. Men with axes at their belts eat in pairs and talk tides. At the gate a woman with a scale weighs a ring against a penny and gives change in hack silver, because coins alone don't settle trust. The law speaker will stand tomorrow and settle to fights with a price and one with exile. Tonight the river wears a necklace of small fires. A correction to the movie habit. Raids to settlements is not a moral arc, it's a margin arc. Where profits stacked, camps stayed where not, rivers cleared. The same crews who took chests in spring might build huts in autumn and a chapel in winter if the numbers lined up. What looks like destiny is often schedule. Bring our three lives to the same bench so the network breathes. The shipwright runs a hand along a new Naz plank and tells a boy to feel where the seam hums when tapped. That is tight, that is money. The market woman teaches a Dublin girl the trick of hearing whether a penny sings or sulks. She winks and says, "The scale is the final hymn." The law speaker raises a staff on a mound and calls the husting to quiet. He names a toll, a fairy rule, and a day for the thing men grunt assent by butts of spear on earth wapentop. Numbers. Last this chapter. A fairy posts first and last crossing by tide, and lighter toll lists 3 rates man. Beast. Boat a coin dies when its ring dies, a weight dies when the husting says so. In these small funerals of false promises, towns are born. One last image before we sail for the open Atlantic, rumour Iceland, Greenland, and a coast of woods where grapes swell in sagas. At low tide, Dublin's stakes throw long shadows the Nor rocks, and then rests a penny sings a short, bright note on a table and stops. A clerk folds a toll list under a stone. A child sleeps with a wooden ship his hand, and a market woman's seed weight under his pillow. The westway hums like a harbour line in a steady wind. The 5th part. The North Road is a hedge against famine. When grass thins on narrow fjords and silver tides wobble, crews point bows into a colder wind, first to Iceland, then to Greenland, and once, briefly, beyond woods that strangers already owned. This is not romance first, it's logistics, hay counts, driftwood rights, and a parliament on a lava plain that keeps neighbours predictable. Seen Iceland's south coast, summer, a Nor rides a long swell like a patient animal. Gannet art the steersman tastes damp earth on the wind. Land breeze, he says, and the shipwright lowers the square sail to a handkerchief and points the bow where cloud bottoms darken over shore. No harbour wall here, only a shelving beach and a line of men with poles. They surf the last wave, keel grinds, and the whole settles with a satisfied groan. Women step down with bundles of turf-cut butter, a calf balls from a sling. A boy carries a small iron anvil, the seed of a farm. Terms: quick and clean. LANDNM, land taking, the claim of a farm by clearing and boundary markers. Althing, the National Assembly at Ingvalir. A lava rift turned courthouse, the law speaker Exguma recites law from a rock. Goy, a chieftain priest who gathers followers and speaks for them at the thing. Politics by bundles of farms. Drift rights, who owns timber that washes ashore, a serious question, where trees are rare. Stockfish, wine dried cod, hard as a promise, currency in bulk to Bergen and beyond. Numbers that hold without swagger. Norway to Iceland is a week or two. Under decent wines call it 500,600 nautical miles. On the common route Greenland from Iceland is another 700,800. A Naz comfortable load 20 tons, more if the sea's kind. Althing meets once a year for about a week. The law speaker's term is 3 years. A case can last hours or summers. A winter farms. Hay must carry a herd from October to gross numbers. You count in breaths when snow stays late. Close seen in Valere, c. 930 by later count. The Rift Valley holds a crowd. Booths of turf and cloth. Horses tied nose to tail. Smoke drifting from cookpots. The law speaker stands on the law rock and sings clauses in a voice trained for stone. Boundaries, inheritance, outlawry, wergeld, ship dues, driftwood claims. Men step forward with witnesses. Women carry folded parchments. A foster son speaks for his foster father. Deals happen in the shade of a cliff. Marriages, grazing swaps, alliances that ride home in pairs. There is no king here. There is a schedule that behaves like one. Myth, trimmed and tagged. Sunstones that find the sun through cloud live in later tales. Maybe calcite tricks existed, maybe not. Northmen, found land by birds, swell, smell, and latitudes in the head. Short day links counted on fingers. Horned helmets still belong to costume. Discovery of America lines step on people. Already there when a timber-hungry crew built turf halls at a northern cove. They were visitors on an own shore. Greenland is a gamble runner's policy. Farms tuck into fjords, where sunlight leans. Long turf walls hold heat. Churches rise as the silver economy learns wax and wool. Walrus ivory and hides, falcons and narwhal tusks pay for iron and cloth. When ships come winter counts hay and seals. The same holes that carry cord as stockfish east carry tusks and regret west. When ice tightens, the calendar misses payments. Numbers again. Useful. A turf longhouse might run 20 meters, smoke-laced, with benches where weaving and law get equal time. A ship makes 2 or 3 crossings in a golden summer. A bad one eats both time and hope. At Lanzo Meadows, Newfoundlander, small iron bloomery and boat rivets tell archaeology what sagas hint. A test camp c. 1000, turf walls, work done, then gone. The ledger says timber, not empire. Bring our 3 lives across the ridge, so the network feels human. The shipwright-ized driftwood piles like a banker-ized chests. Spruce from a storm. A straight piece for a masttop. Law about who touches what. He builds with turf and stone now as much as oak. The market woman keeps her scale in a booth at the Althing and weighs stockfish bundles against imported cloth and needles. She also trades news who wintered badly, who needs a foster son, who will rent grazing by the creek for silver or favor. The law speaker dips a ladle and drinks between verses. His memory is a bridge from fjord to fjord. He rules on a drift log with 2 axe marks, one clan's claim. Another's cut fine split in halves. Terms, 2 more, then onward. Outlawry here means no shelter, no breadboards, no law to hold your anger death in a land without trees. Thing fines are paid in traded goods. When silver is thin, homespun, cheese, soapstone pots. A farm's wealth is winter feed, not coins. The scale weighs months, not money. Seen sailing west to timber. A small party threads between ice with low sail and high nerves. They follow whales, watch the color of the sea, and release ravens to sea as they return. When a raven goes straight, land is straight. They beach in a cove where grape stories grow in later mouths. Here the truth is timber straight, tall, boat length ringed and marked for return in spring. Another crew meets people in skin boats whose language moves like water. Hands show trade. Then fear, then arrows. The Norse leave with planks and a bruise on pride. A year later, no one makes the trip. Not failure math. Numbers, colder. A Greenland farm can last centuries if trade holds. If not, winter becomes policy. A dozen tusks pay a summer's debts. A failed hunt costs a herd in spring. In Iceland, stockfish runs pay taxes to Norwegian kings later. Before that, the Althing keeps time with hay and law. Across the north, churches and courts braid into habit. Silver thins, predictability thickens. Tie far edge to home, so stakes land. The Althing hears of a ship on the Greenland run and rules on estates. Wives keep farms. Sons swear to stay until hay stands. A drift dispute settled fair keeps axes from singing. A law about grazing paths saves a dozen winter tempers. In places without walls or kings, calendars and clauses are walls you can pack on a horse. One last image before we turn to conversion, kings, and coins. The way the network folds back into states. Evening at Ingvalia, sun low, lava black, a line of geese writing south on the air. The lost speaker finishes a clause, and for a heartbeat the crowd is silent, held by memory louder than steel. Then the market resumes, needles for a homespun, cheese for soapstone, a scale that knows how much a winter weighs. Far out on the sea, a Nor leans toward Norway with bundles of cod as neat as books. The sixth part. Kings learn to fix the calendar. What began as boats, scales, and oaths folded into states, runes into law codes, bullion into pennies, the thing into a schedule with a seal. Conversion did not fall like thunder, it arrived like a bell that rang on time. Scene gelling, a damp morning around the year 165. A carver leans into granite, dust running in lines down his forearms. On the great stone a cross grows among serpents and beasts. The inscription names Harold, son of Gorm, who won the whole of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. Men from the markets glance up, shrug, and keep bargaining. Faith turns slow, coin turns fast. In a nearby booth, new pennies show a cross where once only weight spoke. The market woman still weighs silver, but now she also listens for a good ring on the king's die. Terms, quick and clean, gelling stones, royal runner stones that announce a new story of rule. Lydang, the naval levy, farmers owing ship service, oars, and food by district and date oaths turned into a muster table. Gulithing, Frostading, West Norwegian law assemblies, and their codes all gathered into clauses. Sigtuna, a fresh royal town and mint late 10th sea. As Birka fades, coins and Christian graves say, who runs the calendar? Tithe, a tenth for church and Paul soon a posted due, not a passing hat. Numbers that hold without swagger. A good late Viking penny weighs around 1.31, 7 grams 240 pennies, make a pound of silver. In the early 1000s, English kings and Viking rulers strike coins in dozens of mints under Canute. England runs many town dies at once, so designs change by issue like a clock. Danigelds that once ransomed a season rise into the tens of thousands of pounds of silver, millions of pennies counted across tables, while clerks' wrists ache. Schedules appear. Coin types valid for a set term, weights tested at fairs on the first market day, like Idang musters at sowing or harvest's end. Close scene Sigtuna Quay, late 10th century. The shipwright steps off a Nor and hears a different music. Hammers at a mint, a bell on a church porch that calls more than prayer time to open, time to close. He runs a thumb along a plank, he's selling, and watches a royal reef check scales at the stall with a standard weight. Across the lane, a moneyer strikes, flan, die, thump. Across blooms where a dirham once lay bitten. The market woman deals both ways, hex silver for old hands, pennies for tolls and fines, keeping a tiny test scale behind her ear like a comb. Myth, trimmed and tagged. Conversion did not erase the old law, it braided with it. Outlawry still bites, wergeld still prices, anger now sanctuary at a church door buys an hour for tempers to cool, and tired buy oil for a pest house and bread for the shut-in. The Viking Age ended in 1066 is a schoolroom doorplate. The habit changed shape before the date was engraved. Towns, mints, levies, and written clauses were already thickening. The thing learns to speak in clauses that a scribe can catch. At the Gulithing, a lost speaker recites old verses beside new lines, church peace, market days, coin types, measures for ale. The king's highway to be kept passable by each farm in turn. He names the Lydang districts, and their all counts. A clerk copies the list on vellum for the first time. Witnesses lay hands on the page. The river of memory gets banks. Bring the West's pennies and the North's schedules into the same ledger. In York J of Casent, Peter's penny rings under a moneyer's hammer. In Dublin, the Longfort becomes streets where tolls and the bell of St. Patrick set hours. In England, the huge payments, once called Danageld, melt into ordinary tax. With a timetable, coin designs change. by royal order on schedule, flushing clipped or rolled types from the market. A network once held together by oaths and reputation learns to run on posted times and printed faces. Our 3 lives cross this hinge and keep breathing. The shipwright thickens ribs for a king's levy whole idang work that pays in coin and standing. He learns to cut a mast a hand shorter to match a deeper sail that like steadier winds more cargo, less stunt. The market woman pins a tiny cross-marked coin between finger and thumb, rings it, then weighs it anyway. She has eyes for both worlds and a purse divided in 2. The law speaker grey now stands with a bishop's man at his side and speaks a clause that braids mercy into fees. Tithe due at Lammas sanctuary one night, only were geld reduced if insult is confessed before the bell. Numbers again, useful in the year. A Lidang district might owe 1 ship per so many farms, stocked for 2 or 3 months barley, dried fish, ale, tar, spare rivets. The list is a piece in disguise. A royal peonage cycle runs to a few years, per type moneyers, names on dies, make fraud expensive. Law codes copy older recitations into pages that take a man an afternoon to chant hearings, fit between milking and haying. Schedules become the king's real crown. Sinra skilled sound, a levy on the wind. Spring, holes muster by district, painted marks on stems lined like runes along the shore. The reeve checks or benches, and food tubs the priest chalks across on the steering oar and moves on. This is not the first time these men have rowed. It may be the first time they do it to a posted plan that reaches 3 fjords deep. A trader's map has become a navy's schedule without changing rivers. Myth, another trim. Longships do not vanish, they specialize. But by the 12th, 13th centuries, round-bodied cogs with single stern rudders will carry bulk for kings and burghers out of deeper harbors. The shallow genius that made raids and fares possible does not die, it takes toll at river mouths, while bigger holes own the blue. The network becomes layers. Tie coin to conscience, so stakes land. A cross on a penny is not a miracle, it is a promise of weight, purity, and the peace to spend it. A tithe posted on a church door feeds poor and pest house on a schedule that markets respect. The thing's old power turning anger into rates now lives in a code you can point to. Our shipwright and market woman raise children who argue over clauses, not blades, because the bell and the die agree on what hour it is. Numbers, last cluster this chapter. Tens of thousands of pounds of silver once paid to fleets become salaries, toll reforms, and coin exchanges. Dozens of mints hammer type changes across a realm in months. A lawman's circuit spring to autumn touches a dozen things and posts a half-dozen new measures for grain, cloth, and ale. The distance between a dirham bite and a king's penny is measured in schedules, not years. One last image before we close the age, without pretending it ended in a single noon. Dusk at gelling again. The stone stands with its carved cross nearby, a coin strikes on a die farther off. A levy hole slides down a slip. Boys count oar holes in a sing-song in a boothlight. The market woman taps a penny and then, smiling to herself, weighs it anyway. The law speaker closes a vellum leaf and rests his hand on it, the way he once rested it on a beam. A network of boats has become a country that keeps time. Why this matters tomorrow. What survived the raids was the method. River as road, market as court, oath as clause, coin as schedule. When kings learned to run those on calendars, the Viking world didn't vanish, it taught the states that followed how to keep water, silver, and sentences moving together. The 7th part. Memory learned to sort thunder from timber. By the time a cross stood on coins and law lived on vellum, the old network had already sunk its pilings into Europe. Words on maps, habits at markets, and a way of turning danger into a posted rate. The story people like to keep, the one about sudden storms and kings on beaches survived. The story they lived with, the one about boats as roads and cords, as bridges stayed underfoot. Seen thing wall on the Wirral, a windy rise that looks over water. The place name itself is a fossil. Thing plus wall, the earthwork where a local assembly met. Men and women come with ordinary business fences, fairies, a drowned cow. A reeve reads tolls in English with Norse in the joints and money as scales sit on a board. A church bell marks the hour for closing arguments. 1,000 miles east, at Novgorod's Vech, the habit is similar. A crowd by the river, a bell that summons, a vote by shout and show of hands. Assemblies outlive sales. Terms, quick and clean. Varangian Guard, the emperor's axe-bearing foreigners in Constantinople sworn, paid well, guardians of doors and treasuries. Danegeld, a ransom that hardened into tax, then into calendar. Thing, Vech, Husting. Different tongues for the same cure. Talk first, price conflict, post the result. Toponyms, Dingwall, Thingvella, Tinwald, Whitby from Huftaba, White Settlement. Names that remember schedules, not sagas. Numbers that hold without swagger. A Varangian Guard stipend might run in gold solidi, where farmers at home counted in silver pennies. It bought land or respect when men retired north. Place name counts run into the hundreds across Britain and Ireland, where Norse settled evidence you can pronounce. A market toll was a sliver 1 in 40. 1 in 50 small enough to accept, large enough to fund a bridge or a watch. Habit budgets the future. Close seen Constantinople's Great Palace, 11th century. A corridor of porphyry guards in mail, and silken emperor who speaks little and watches much. A weathered northerner stands at a post with a gilded axe and thinks in schedules, watch hours, pay days, ship sailings on the Bosporus that carry grain upriver. He has come a long way from a fjord yard, but the contract in his head is the same duty for coin, coin for land, rules for anger. Myth, trimmed and tagged. The Viking Age ended in 1066, fits a school chart. It does not fit a ledger. Boats kept running to Dublin. The thing met at Tinwald Orkneys. Jarls bargained with bishops. Russia's rivers carried wax and furs. The Norman Duke Scandinavian by grandfather. Frankish by law, and a kingdom through writs and shire courts that would have made a law speaker smile. The network didn't vanish, it was hired. Language keeps quiet score. English keeps sky, skirt, egg, window, law, husband. Everyday nouns borrowed from men who measured days by wind and oar. Thursday still wears Thor's name like a shrug. Even law itself, rooted in Old Norse lack, what is laid down reminds you that rules are things you set in rows, like planks or weights, so people can step on them. Bring markets forward, so the boat's shadow stays clear. In York's Coppergate, a century after the first Longford days, comb makers still scrape antler in Dublin, coins ring that would be as familiar in Rouen, in London in Bergen. Stockfish tallies march down wharflogs in neat cuts in the beck. Hans merchants' successors in patience, if not in origin, write letters of advice that talk about wines and wares the way a shipwright once did. The holes change shape, the schedule does not. Numbers again, useful in the ear. A Hansa Contra trading house might levy a small fee on every last of fish. A Norman tally stick held notches that matched a clerk's copy when split and rejoined trust by wood grain. A thing day at Tinwald still falls on midsummer. The law is read on a hill, walk around in an hour. Time itself, portioned and posted, is the inheritance. Seen an Icelandic lawbook laid open on a bench, c. 1280. GRGS, the Grey Goose, a nickname for weighty parchment, collects what the law speaker once kept in his memory. Sections on the Althing, outlawry, marriage, drift rights, ship dues. A scribe dips a quill and fixes into lines the clauses men once chanted. Across the sea in Norway, Magnus Lagoti lawmender will tidy and consolidate codes with the same instinct. Ritual into rubric, habit into headings. The method is familiar. Take what works, write it down, post where and when. Tie ships to states, so stakes land. The same shallow genius that let a hole nose up a creek without permission taught kings and councils to think like water, move around obstacles, keep schedule, make the road where the road is needed. Rivers became streets, fords became ferries, ferries became dues, became budgets, built bridges, made courts busier and raids rarer. It is not romantic, it is civilization by or beat. Our 3 lives ease towards silence without vanishing. The shipwright old now walks a wharf lined with cogs and smiles at a clinker dinghy that still ferries men and scales to market. He taps a plank with a knuckle and hears a familiar hum. The market woman, hair white and arms short, teaches a girl to weigh silver and test a penny's ring, then folds the girl's hand around a tiny seed weight, the way you might pass a family spoon. The lost speaker sits on a bench and listens to a young lawman read from vellum what he once sang when the bell rings for the midday break. He nods, rules, and hunger both obey the hour. A last correction to legend. The horned helmet is a costume dream. The blood eagle is an argument in texts, not a scene you should trust. The real violence was often administrative, fines, forfeits, exiles. The real miracle was administrative, too. The scale that steadied, the claws that spread, the boat that made a river a plan. One last image before we close the cover. A map without borders, just lines of water and dots for markets. Burka, Korpang, Rib, Hidibi, York, Dublin, Bergen, Novgorod, Bulgar, Itil, Miklogar, Constantinople. Threads run between them like rigging. Over the map fall three tools: a small equal-armed scale, a seed weight, and a folded penny. Under them lies a page from a law book. If you listen, you can still hear oars, but you can also hear a clerk's quill and a bell. The network learned to speak in time. Why this matters tomorrow. If you want a coast to stop producing pirates, give it courts, schedules, and a wage worth staying for. The Vikings taught that by accident. Build a boat that eats distance, a market that tests weights, and an assembly that prices anger, and the storm becomes a timetable. The eighth part. A river keeps what it teaches. Long after holes change shape and coins change faces, three simple machines still hum beneath the noise. A boat that eats distance, a scale that steadies promises, a court that turns anger into a price. Call them ship, silver, and sentence. They carried the north from rumor into routine and left marks you can still point to on water, in words, and on maps. Seen dawn on a quiet estuary that could be almost anywhere in the north. Mist lies lower, rowboats, clinker planks show their familiar lap farther out. A deeper-bellied vessel rolls gently at anchor. On the bank a trader unfolds a cloth and sets down an equal-armed scale. Across the grass a small wooden bell frame waits to mark opening time for the fair. Nothing here asks for a saga, everything here asks for a schedule. Terms, last and light. Network, not a web drawn by scholars, but a habit lived by hands, roots learned. Faces trusted, fees expected. Reputation, the credit score of a world without paper banks, faster than a fast boat, slower to fix than a plank. Standard, weight, measure, toll, or coin agreed by a crowd and defended by a clerk, a reeve, and a bell. These are not romantic words. They are the bones under stories. Numbers that hold without showing off. A foot of water under a light hull still makes a road where a deep ship sees a wall. 1 gram here, or there on a coin, still makes a market murmur, or a guard step in. 1 hour posted for a ferry, or a thing's day still decides whether tempers cool or rise. Arithmetic remains the public face of trust. Close seen to voices at the same table. A girl, maybe 12, lays a dirham fragment and a cross-marked penny side by side and asks which is better. The market woman, hair white, now rings the penny, weighs the dirham, and says, "It depends what you owe and to whom." She places both on the beam, adds a seed weight, and lets the tongue settle. "Better," she says, "is the balance." Behind them, a clerk pins a sheet, rates, hours, and the name of the man who will read disputes at noon. The day becomes a promise you can keep, myth, trimmed and retired. Horned helmets stay in costume boxes. Raiders turned farmers is to neat crews always farmed somewhere, or knew who did. Discovery is a word with sharp edges. People were already on the shores where Norse tested timber. The Viking Age ended in a year is a chalk line on a classroom board. The network's end is a gradient. Pennies and writs thicken. Dirhams thin, long forts harden into towns. Things grow into courts with benches and clerks. The boat remains at the edge of all that, as useful as a pocket knife. Bring the east and west into one line, so the arc holds. East, Ostrovega's rivers, portages, winter palisades, dirhams glinting like fishmen, Varangians with axe handles, and wage slips in solidus markets Bulgar. Itil where a northern habit learns southern weights, west, long forts at muddy banks, pennies that sing when honest, Danigeld counted until it became tax, JRVKS Combe Row, Dublin's toll post, a ferry that keeps hours by tide and bell, the hinge, kings who took oaths, unturned them into typed coin lost speakers, who let scribes copy what once only a trained throat could carry. Our 3 lives settle in like fixtures. The shipwright walks a wharf where cogs load bales, and a clinker dinghy bumps a post. He teaches a boy to hear a seam's hum and not trust paint over sound. The market woman passes her seed weight to the girl and says, "It looks like nothing and weighs everything." The lost speaker, hands folded, listens to a young reader chant clauses from a vellum leaf and smiles when the crowd grunts assent on the familiar lines. Weights tested first day, fairy hours by tide, peace on the church path and the market lane, numbers again, for the last time, to oar lengths between boats as a landing keeps tempers low, for witness hands on a scale, when weights are tested, keeps the next year honest. 40 days on an island for sickness, or at sea for a timber run works as a rhythm in more centuries than one. Schedules outlive empires, because hunger and rumour keep the same hours in every age. See names as fossils. A traveller's map shows Thingwall, Dingwall, Tynwald, Whitby. Each is a label over a memory. We met here. We weighed here. We paid this much to cross. Our anger caused that. And we agreed to meet again in a year. On another map, rivers were a second script trade routes that never quite leave the surface. On a third, coin finds show metal moving like weather. Dirham storms in 1 century, penny showers in the next. There is no border on these maps, only intervals. Tie pasta now without preaching. When a harbour asks for papers and posts a schedule, you're hearing a faint echo of Ragusa and Dublin. When a weekly report comes a market, more than a rumour does, you're hearing a bellman over London and a lost speaker over a rift. When a small court at a crossroads settles a fee and a fence line without steel, you're standing at a thing with a new coat of paint. The machines change, the habit remains. A small correction to hero habits. The men with names in sagas did large things rarely. The people who built the world we live in did small things often. Checking a plank, balancing a coin, posting an hour, holding a line of lanterns at night, so a cordon breathes instead of breaks. If you want to understand reach, watch schedules, not swords. One last image to set the oars down. The mist lifts. The rowboat's keel kisses gravel. The deeper vessel turns her bow toward a channel marked by poles on the grass. The clerk's sheet flutters in a shy breeze and stays. The scale's tongue trembles, then stands still. A bell sounds once, low and round, somewhere, underwater and time. An old kelson dries and cracks inside a museum's light. And an older rhythm lift, push, rest keeps beating in the way people make days into roads. Why this matters tomorrow. Networks made of wood, silver, and words taught Europe, and not only Europe, that distance can be governed by agreement. If you want a coast to stay useful and quiet, make the boat simple, the scale honest, and the court on time. The rest is weather.